If you were to look at a photograph of a man who, spent his entire life fighting institutionalized racial oppression, standing right next to a man who has spent decades exiled from his homeland.
You'd probably expect to see some pretty heavy, solemn faces, right?
Exactly. I mean, you'd anticipate seeing the literal physical toll of carrying all that trauma, the weight of their respective peoples.
Yeah, that would be the totally rational expectation.
But on the back cover of the source material we are unpacking today, these two men are, well, they're practically dancing.
It's amazing.
Right. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a really special project today called The Book of Joy, Lasting Happiness in a Changing World.
And we've got a fascinating stack of sources to go through.
We really do. We've got biographical texts, excerpts, and some incredibly striking visual evidence. And it's all centered around His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, and the Archbishop Emeritus of Southern Africa, Desmond Tutu.
And we also have to mention author and editor Douglas Abrams, who he basically facilitated this entire dialogue between them.
Right. So the central tension we're exploring for you today is how two individuals who have lived through some of the most intense civil conflict, displacement, and oppression of the modern era are defined not by bitterness, but by this overwhelming, contagious sense of joy.
Because they're looking at joy not as a byproduct of an easy life. It's treated as a deliberate discipline.
Yeah, before we get into the actual mechanics of that discipline, I feel like we have to talk about the physical embodiment of it in these photographs.
Oh, the visual contrast is just jarring.
It really is. So you open the flap of the book, and there is this black and white photo of all three men. You've got Douglas Abrams towering in the middle.
Yeah, he is significantly taller than both of them, yeah.
He really is.
Yeah.
And on his right is Archbishop Tutu in his clerical collar, and he's leaning pretty heavily on a cane.
Right.
On his left is the Dalai Lama in his traditional Buddhist robes. They're standing shoulder to shoulder, and it's a very warm, unified image. Very nice, very standard.
Standard being the key word there.
Exactly. But then when you flip to the back cover, the entire narrative we usually assign to historical or spiritual figures just gets completely upended.
Because it's this vibrant color photograph of just the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu, and they are entirely in motion.
They are. Like the Dalai Lama has his hands up, grinning from ear to ear.
Yeah.
The deep reds and yellows of his robes are just flowing around him.
And the Archbishop has his hands pulled up into these playful fists, right?
Yes. Stepping forward in his dark suit and bright red shirt, and his face is lit up with this massive, roaring laugh. They're literally shaking their fingers at each other.
Like two mischievous grandpas just cutting loose at a family reunion.
That is exactly what it looks like. And it's startling because I think society trains us to view spiritual authority through this lens of extreme solemnity.
Right. We expect our leaders to be stoic.
Yeah, almost like marble statues, just projecting a quiet, undisturbed peace. But this photo is loud. It's messy.
Well, and that visual playfulness serves a very specific rhetorical purpose here.
Oh, you think it's intentional?
Absolutely. By presenting themselves this way, they are intentionally stripping away that intimidating veneer of holiness. I mean, if they had chosen a solemn, meditative portrait.
It would inadvertently communicate that joy is this rigid religious duty, right?
Exactly. Like it's something you only achieve by sitting on a mountaintop in absolute silence for 20 years.
Which most of us can't do.
Right. By laughing and playfully sparring, they are democratizing joy. They are telling you that this state of being is a vibrant, duckly human experience that's accessible right in the middle of a messy relationship with a good friend.
Okay, I see the appeal of that framing, but
yeah.
Well, looking at them having the absolute time of their lives on this cover, it naturally invites a little bit of skepticism.
Sure.
A cynic might look at that and assume, well, they're just isolated from the real world.
Like they're living in a bubble.
Yeah, maybe they can laugh like that because they are insulated in monasteries or cathedrals, fully protected from the daily grind that the rest of us deal with.
But reading through their actual biographical details provided in our sources just shatters that assumption entirely.
It really does.
The architecture of their hardship is the very reason this book carries so much weight. The juxtaposition between their joyous demeanor and their lived realities, that's the core of their entire philosophy.
So let's lay out those realities for a second, just straight from the text. The Dalai Lama is the spiritual leader of the Tibetan people, but the text plainly states a defining fact of his existence. He lives in exile in Dharamsala, India.
Right, which means waking up every single day for decades, unable to return to his homeland.
Decades. carrying the burden of preserving a culture and a people who have been entirely displaced. And then we look at Desmond and Tutu.
Right. The text outlines his role as a really prominent leader in the crusade for justice and racial reconciliation in South Africa.
Yeah, he lived through profound civil conflict and apartheid, and eventually he was appointed chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
And we should really pause on that commission, because understanding its mechanism is crucial to understanding Tutu's joy.
It wasn't just a normal committee, was it?
Not at all. The source material notes that this commission pioneered a totally new way for countries to move forward after experiencing civil conflict.
So how did it actually work?
The mechanism of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission required victims and perpetrators of horrific systemic violence to literally face each other.
Wow. In the same room?
In the same room. Tutu had to sit there day after day, listening to the darkest, most brutal realities of what human beings can do to one another.
That is just incomprehensible to me.
And somehow he had to forge a path toward national healing rather than retributive bloodshed.
Knowing that context makes the photo of him laughing it almost breaks your brain a little bit.
It's hard to process.
Yeah, because if you spend your career processing the trauma of an entire nation or carrying the weight of a displaced people in exile, you have every right to be totally consumed by cynicism.
Exhaustion and bitterness would be completely rational responses to those resumes.
Totally rational. So how do you go from absorbing the trauma of deep civil oppression to playfully dancing for a camera? It feels like cognitive dissonance.
Well, it looks like cognitive dissonance if you operate under the assumption that joy is merely the absence of suffering.
Okay, unpack that a little.
We often treat happiness as a passive state, right? It's the thing that happens when our lives are easy, when our bills are paid, and when no one is bothering us.
Right, when all the lights are green.
Exactly. But the lives of the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu argue the exact opposite. Their joy is an active, deliberate response to suffering.
Almost like a tool that was forged in the specific fires they walked through.
Precisely. When you are tasked with pioneering a way for a fractured country to heal or, leading a people in exile, a passive, fleeting happiness based on good circumstances will just shatter instantly.
Wouldn't hold up for a second.
No. You require a joy that is robust enough to look human cruelty right in the face and not break. Their laughter isn't a denial of the world's pain, it is a triumph over it.
They're utilizing joy as a mechanism for survival.
Yes.
And leadership.
Yes.
That brings us to the mechanics of how they actually do this, which is where this deep dive gets intensely practical.
Because the source material doesn't just leave us marveling at their resilience.
Right, it gives us their exact blueprints. Right above the photo of them dancing on the back cover, there are two distinct quotes that serve as the thesis statements for their philosophy.
The Dalai Lama states, the ultimate source of happiness is within us.
Okay.
And then Archbishop Desmond Tutu adds, we grow in kindness when our kindness is tested.
I love that. Tutu's quote is so beautifully counterintuitive. We grow in kindness when our kindness is tested. It reframes the entire concept of hardship.
How so?
Well, we think about the human spirit like an immune system. It completely changes the paradigm. You don't build a strong immune system by living in a sterile bubble where you are never exposed to a germ.
Right. A totally sterile environment actually weakens your defense.
Exactly. You build immunity through exposure to pathogens. The body encounters a virus, struggles against it, and then manufactures the antibodies that make it stronger for the next encounter.
That analogy tracks perfectly with Tutu's philosophy. The oppressive forces he faced, the systemic racism, the sheer cruelty of the civil conflict in South Africa, these were the societal pathogens.
By viruses, yeah.
And instead of allowing those pathogens to infect him with bitterness, he used the exposure to manufacture a more robust capacity for kindness.
Wow.
The hardship wasn't an obstacle to his spiritual growth, it was the exact mechanism of it.
And when you connect Tutu's concept of, the moral immune system with the Dalai Lama's quote, the ultimate source of happiness is within us, you get a profound shift in the locus of control.
Which is huge.
Right, because if your happiness is entirely internally sourced, then external circumstances, whether that is political exile or just a really terrible day at work, cannot fundamentally dictate your joy.
They can only test it. That is the crucial synthesis of their two thoughts right there.
Yeah.
By locating the source of happiness internally, you strip the external world of its power to destroy your peace. If a situation is difficult, it is merely providing the friction necessary for you to practice Tutu's tested kindness.
It empowers the individual immensely. You are no longer just a passive victim of a changing world, waiting for circumstances to align so you can finally be happy.
You become an active participant in generating your own joy, using the very friction of the world to hone it.
Which is incredibly relevant for you, listening right now. You don't need to be dismantling apartheid or living in exile to use this.
Definitely not.
When you are dealing with a toxic work environment, a difficult family member, or even just the daily grind of financial stress, those are your specific pathogens.
Those are the exact moments your kindness and your internal joy are being tested.
And consequently, where they have the opportunity to grow. But applying esoteric spiritual philosophies to an annoying morning commute can feel like a bit of a stretch, which is why we need to look at how they intentionally package this wisdom for everyday use.
Right. The text provides a very clear bridge for this everyday application. It highlights a specific phrase in the Dalai Lama's biography that is vital here.
What does it say?
Well, it notes his extensive travel promoting interfaith understanding, but then it explicitly calls him a passionate advocate for a secular, universal approach to cultivating fundamental human values.
I have to admit, seeing the word secular attached to one of the most famous religious figures on the planet is pretty surprising.
It stands out for sure.
I mean, his entire public identity is inextricably linked to Tibetan Buddhism.
Mm.
Why would a major religious leader purposefully step outside of his own theological framework to advocate for a secular approach?
It reveals a really profound pragmatism. I mean, the title of the project addresses a changing world, which implies universal challenges, anxiety, division, suffering.
Things everyone faces.
Exactly. If the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu only offered solutions cloaked in the specific language of Buddhism or Christianity, they would instantly alienate billions of people who don't share their theology.
Right, people just tune it out.
Yeah. By framing joy, kindness, and compassion as fundamental human values rather than religious obligations, they are essentially open sourcing their wisdom.
Open sourcing, I like that.
They are arguing that you don't need to adopt their belief systems to utilize their tools. You simply need to tap into your shared humanity.
They are completely separating the technology of joy from the dogma of religion. And this is exactly where Douglas Abrams becomes so essential to the project.
Oh, absolutely.
The text describes Abrams not as a theologian, but as an author, editor, and literary agent dedicated to working with visionaries to create a wiser, healthier, and more just world.
And he also spent more than a decade collaborating with Desmond Tutu as a co-writer and editor.
So you really knew him.
He really did. Abrams serves as the proxy for the secular everyday reader. When you have two towering spiritual intellects in a room, the conversation could easily drift into highly abstract theological theory, right?
Very easily.
Abrams's role, which he honed over a decade of collaboration, is to act as the grounding wire.
Like a translator.
Exactly. He translates the dialogue between a Buddhist monk and a Christian archbishop into the practical, secular, universal toolkit that the Dalai Lama advocates for. He ensures the mechanics of joy remain accessible to someone who has never stepped foot in a church or a temple.
It's just a brilliant collaborative architecture. You have the raw materials of joy, which were forged the extreme fires of Tutu and the Dalai Lama's lived experiences. And then you have Abrams refining and packaging those materials so they can be shipped to anyone, anywhere, regardless of their background.
And this brings us full circle to the visual evidence that shocked us at the beginning, the photos. The reason they can dance on the cover of a book about lasting happiness in a changing, often painful world is because they have pressure tested this secular universal philosophy in the most extreme conditions imaginable, and they have found that it holds structural integrity.
It really reframes the entire pursuit of happiness. We spend so much time and energy trying to construct a life where we can just avoid the storm,
Constantly running for cover.
Right. We try to insulate ourselves from difficult people, uncomfortable situations, and outright hardship, believing that joy is waiting for us in the absence of those things.
But the combined wisdom of these sources argues that avoiding the storm is a fool's errand.
It really is. True joy is found by actively cultivating your internal happiness when you are in the dead center of the storm. The suffering isn't an interruption of your life's joy, it's the very forge where that joy is hardened and made permanent.
And the visual of these two men intimately acquainted with the absolute darkest capabilities of human nature, choosing to playfully shake their fingers at each other in brightly colored clothes, is perhaps the most defiant argument for their philosophy.
It proves that joy can survive alongside a profound awareness of the world's pain.
It doesn't ignore it. It survives it.
It's a powerful image to carry with you. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to apply to your own changing world.
Something to take with them.
Exactly. Think about the biggest friction point in your life right now. The circumstance, the person, or the hardship that is currently testing your patience, draining your peace of mind, or just provoking your anger.
Whatever that pathogen is.
Yeah. If we apply Archbishop Tutu's logic of the moral immune system, what if that specific challenge isn't a roadblock preventing your happiness?
What if it's the exact, perfectly calibrated resistance you need right now to discover your own capacity for lasting joy?
Just something to ponder the next time you feel the weight of the world. And you have to decide whether you're going to stand there like a solemn marble statue or whether you're going to choose to dance.